Who has a better historical claim to this piece of land that lies between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea? Well, if we ask Shapiro... Sorry. Autocorrect. Ben Shapiro, he has this to say.
Israel is historically Muslim territory. This is a pure and absolute lie. Israel is historically Jewish territory.
But that's not exactly true. Let's look at his recent video, You're Being Lied To About Israel and Palestine, and compare his claims to reality. Spoiler alert, they don't always match. And along the way, we'll examine the history of this region and find the true answer to the question of which side has a superior ancestral claim to this land. I think the answer will surprise you.
The things that we have been seeing on our screens from Hamas are atrocities, obviously. But the media have said that these atrocities, they're really missing context. The context they are providing, well, that context is a bunch of lies. There are 4 myths generally propagated by the left around the history of Israel and the Palestinians. These myths matter because they lead people into a peculiar moral relativism whereby attempted murder or successful murder of Jews is excused, and meanwhile, the evil human rights violations of the Palestinians are minimized. Myth number 1, Israel is historically Muslim territory. This is a pure and absolute lie. Israel is historically Jewish territory. According to the Bible and certain interpretations of contemporaneous archaeology, Joshua entered the land of Israel in 1400 BC.
Here, Ben goes through some historical events that go back a really long time ago. Since the conflict between Israel and Palestine is, at its core, about the land of the Palestine region and who the rightful owners of it are, you might wonder why the ancient history of the area is important. That's because one big justification used to defend a group's current rights to that land is how far back in time that group's ancestors lived there.
The Kingdom of David was founded around 1000 BC. The first Temple of Solomon was built in approximately 957 BC. The Second Temple was built in approximately 515 BC. The Hasmonean dynasty was founded in 166 BC. Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 BC, and the Jews exiled from Israel in 136 CE after the defeat of the Bar Kokhba revolt.
Some of these events are more accurate than others, so what's true here and what isn't? Great way to start a video that's trying to be neutral, talking about the historical accuracy of the Bible. So it is a fact that in the Bible, Joshua entered the land of Israel around 1400 BCE. But there is just no good evidence outside of the Bible that Joshua really existed. The book of Joshua is the 6th book of the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Old Testament. It recounts how he conquered the Canaan region, methodically going from city to city and slaughtering everyone who lived there, including men, women, and children. The Israelites killed a lot of people. And some giants, too. However, this part of the Bible was most likely written from the late 600s to mid-500s BCE, around 800 years after Joshua supposedly arrived in Israel. Scholars nearly universally agree that the book of Joshua is not historically accurate, and archaeological evidence largely contradicts the events of the book. When Ben says interpretations of contemporaneous archaeology, he's probably referring to artifacts that some have said prove the existence of both David and Solomon's temple, a biblical king and building that we aren't completely sure existed. Historians generally agree that David was most likely a real person and are more split about the temple. There is extensive evidence for the rest of the events Ben lists, all the way through the Bar Kokhba revolt ending in 136 CE. A quick word about terminology that's about to become relevant. The term Palestine can refer to 2 distinct things. 1, the state of Palestine, which is the nation that currently claims the West Bank and Gaza Strip as its territory, and 2, the region of Palestine, a geographical area east of the Mediterranean Sea. The borders of this region have been pretty fluid throughout history, sometimes being defined as extending into what is the present-day country of Jordan, but today the region is generally understood to be where the states of Israel and Palestine are. I'll use the terms state or region of Palestine to differentiate between the two when necessary. Jewish people, of course, traditionally call the area the Land of Israel or the Holy Land, but in the interest of neutrality, I'll usually just refer to it as the internationally accepted region of Palestine.
The Romans, in an attempt to shame the Jews, renamed the area Palestine as an insult after the Jews' historic enemy, the Philistines.
The Romans changed the name of the province Judea to Syria Palestina, literally meaning Palestinian Syria. This probably happened after the failure of the Bar Kokhba revolt, also known as either the Second or Third Jewish-Roman War. Confusing, I know. Many experts agree that the Romans wanted to get rid of the name Judea to further separate the Jews from their homeland, but this is still very much disputed. Other scholars argue that the name change was because the province was much larger than just the old region of Judea. The name Syria Palestina has been used by the Greeks since at least ancient historian Herodotus wrote about it 500 years earlier, so, these scholars posit, the Romans probably saw it as just calling the territory by its geographical name. Some scholars even think that the name was changed slightly before the revolt, possibly because the province was merged with Galilee. It is true that the Bible depicts the Philistines, a group whose territory bordered the Israelites in ancient times, as an early arch-enemy of the Israelites. In fact, the story of David versus Goliath pits the young David, who would later become king of Israel, against the Philistine giant Goliath. I kind of want to do an entire piece on biblical giants, but it's not really relevant here. Maybe another time. It's very possible that the name was changed from Judea as a slight towards the Jews, but there's no evidence that the Romans' use of the word Palestine in the new name was intended as an insult against them. If PolitiFact were fact-checking Ben's claim here, they'd probably give it a rating of mixed.
Even during the exile, there was continuous Jewish presence in the land. Islam, which is the religion of the Palestinian Arabs, was not even founded until the 7th century CE or AD. No independent Arab state has ever existed in the area known as Palestine.
It is true that not all Jews left Judea in the aftermath of the Bar Kokhba revolt, and that there has been Jewish presence in the land ever since. However, between that pivotal event in 136 CE and the birth of modern Zionism in the late 1800s, that presence has been a small minority of the population. It is also true that Islam was founded in the 7th century CE and that no independent Arab state known as Palestine has ever existed in the area. But this lacks some, well... For most of its history, the region of Palestine has been ruled by large dynasties, with each one taking control after conquering the other. The last independent state there was the Kingdom of Jerusalem, founded by the Christian Crusaders when they took control of the land during the Middle Ages, and it was conquered by an Islamic dynasty over 730 years ago. The known history of the name Palestine actually goes back almost exactly as far as that of the name Israel. The earliest known reference to Israel comes from the translation of hieroglyphs on an ancient Egyptian stele from about 1200 BCE. The earliest use of the word Peliset, a predecessor to the word Palestine, comes from the translation of hieroglyphs in ancient Egyptian inscriptions from about 1150 BCE, referring, of course, to the ancient Philistines. As mentioned earlier, the word Palestine was used by the Greeks to refer to the area since at least the 5th century BCE, and the Romans named their province in the region Syria Palestina in the 2nd century CE. Of course, Syria Palestina wasn't independent, as it was a province of the Roman Empire. So yes, there has never been an independent Arab state in the area known as Palestine, but there just haven't been many independent states there in general. That Christian kingdom of Jerusalem was the only one to exist there at all since the Romans conquered the region back before the birth of Christ, and that kingdom only existed for about 200 of those 2,000 years. A point that Ben seems to be getting at is that Palestinian nationalism is a relatively new phenomenon. While the region was under control of the Ottoman Empire, Palestine was still an unofficial regional name, and its inhabitants based their identities more on tribal and imperial levels, rather than any sense of a cohesive, independent nation. The people of the region began to develop a sense of nationalism in the early 20th century. One of the preeminent scholars of modern Palestinian history, Palestinian-American historian Rashid Khalidi, writes that most Arabs in the region began to think of themselves as Palestinians around the end of World War I, and that this nationalist consciousness is not centuries old, but relatively modern. Even though Ben uses this as a point against any right to a sovereign nation for Palestinian Arabs, he neglects to mention that Palestinian nationalism arose at the same time that Jewish nationalism did, in the early 1900s. Sure, there was no official state of Palestine that predated the state of Israel, but before 1948, the last state to bear the name Israel was the Kingdom of Israel, which was conquered over 2,700 years ago. And as for the word Palestine, roots of using that name to refer to this region, just like those of the name Israel, go back millennia. So Ben's given us a collection of some facts, some fictions, and a biblical myth or two about the history of the area. He lists these in service of proving his larger point. The region of Palestine is historically Jewish and not historically Muslim. But does he prove this point, and in the larger scope of the issue, does he show that Jews have a better claim of ancient ancestors who lived on this land? While he does list some real historical events that happened to Jews here, I think he does a poor job of actually making his case. He gets across that there is some Jewish history in the area, but it seems like his main goal is to show that Jews lived here before Muslims did, and so therefore the region is historically Jewish and not historically Muslim. But he clearly does not disprove that there is plenty of Muslim presence throughout the history of the region, and honestly, he could have made a better case for modern Jews' historical ties to the area. So in order to examine Israel's historic ties to the land using only real history, let's take a look at a very abridged version of Jewish history in the region of Palestine. So Jewish people traditionally trace their ancestry back to the ancient Israelites, and they were a group of tribes that spoke Semitic languages and lived in the Canaan region of the Levant, what we now call the region of Palestine. The word Semitic refers to a group of both ancient and modern languages spoken in the West Asia and North Africa area, including Hebrew and Arabic. Most ancient Israelites lived on land that now makes up the modern states of Israel and Palestine. As stated earlier, the first known mention of the people of Israel is from an Egyptian inscription from around 1200 BCE, and although Ben and the Bible say that Joshua arrived there with the ancient Israelites and conquered Canaanite land, current academic consensus is that the Israelites probably emerged from the Canaanites in the area. We do know that by around 930 BCE, the Israelites were living in the separate kingdoms of Israel and Judah. The local Canaanite religion had been polytheistic, but the kingdoms of Israel and Judah came to worship only one of the gods from this religion more and more, Yahweh. In the book of Ezra and Nehemiah, the authors tell the probably largely true story of the return to Zion, an event that happened in the 6th century BCE. When the Neo-Babylonian Empire took the kingdom of Judah, many Jews had been exiled from the land of Israel to Babylon. The Achaemenid Empire, led by Cyrus the Great, soon defeated the Neo-Babylonians and took control of their land. Cyrus issued a decree allowing the Jews to return to the land of Judah, where they would have religious freedom. The returned exiles then erected the Second Temple, as mentioned earlier, in about 515 CE. The word Zion comes from Mount Zion, a hill in the city of Jerusalem, and is used to refer to Jerusalem or the land of Israel as a whole, and is from which the modern Zionist movement takes its name. The story of the return to Zion has loomed large in Jewish culture and tradition ever since it happened, with many Jews longing for a similar return to their promised land over the years. After several tumultuous centuries of control of the area passing between different groups, the elites of Jerusalem were practicing monotheistic worship of only Yahweh, and assembled a good portion of the Hebrew Bible in the 400s BCE. Yahweh is, of course, the Hebrew name of the God that all Abrahamic religions worship to this day. Judaism continued to evolve and was a strong force in the region for hundreds of years, until the Romans slaughtered the Jews in the Bar Kokhba revolt, ending in 136 CE. In that year, Jewish control of the land of Israel, and all Jewish control over any state of their own, ceased until the birth of modern Zionism over 1700 years later. A key part of today's Zionist claims to the region of Palestine or the land of Israel is that modern-day Jews have inherited the right to the land from the ancient Israelites. In the Hebrew Bible, God promised this land to Abraham and his descendants forever. According to the biblical narrative, Abraham's grandson Jacob is the patriarch of the Israelites. And if modern Jews are the descendants of the Israelites, the reasoning goes, that divine promise of the right to their holy land extends to them as well. Now, it's not possible to track genetic ancestry back thousands of years to the specific group that was the ancient Israelites. However, recent evidence does suggest that most modern Jewish communities do indeed have genetic roots from this area. This link is important to today's Zionists since they claim the area as their rightful homeland through this chain of inheritance that stretches back to biblical times. So that's the traditional Jewish justification for their claim to this land. But especially because Ben says that
Myth number 1. Israel is historically Muslim territory. This is a pure and absolute lie.
Let's examine a just as quick look at Arab and Islamic history in the region of Palestine. An important note: Palestinians, Arabs, and Muslims are not different names for the same group. However, the vast majority of people living in the West Bank, outside of Israeli settlements there of course, and the Gaza Strip are both Arab and Muslim, and modern Arab nationalists, including Palestinian nationalists, see both the Arabic language and Islamic religion as central to their cause. Both the Arab and Muslim identities of the people of the region can be traced back to the Islamic caliphates that controlled the area. Muslims conquered Palestine soon after the founding of Islam in the 600 CE, only a few years after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. Over the preceding centuries, the population gradually converted to the Islamic religion that the rulers of the caliphates brought there. Arabic people from other areas of the polis settled in the region, and even the non-Arabs slowly came to identify as Arab, which was seen as more of a cultural identity than an ethnic one. The Christian majority of the area turned into a Muslim majority sometime in the Middle Ages, and Arab Muslims remained the majority until after the creation of the nation of Israel in the 20th century. But since native Palestinians are partially descended from the people who lived in the area before the arrival of the caliphates, they can trace some of their ancestry there back past the birth of Islam. In fact, there was a constant presence of the same genetic lines in the region all the way back to before the birth of Judaism. Okay, all of this has been building up to something. Here it is. The key can be found in an article I referenced earlier, The Genomic History of the Bronze Age Southern Levant. Over 30 scholars contributed to this 2020 study published in Cell, the most cited peer-reviewed biology journal in the world. The researchers extracted and analyzed DNA from the bones of 73 ancient individuals found at 5 archaeological sites, and collected previously published ancient DNA data of 20 more individuals discovered at 4 other locations. These sites, found in present-day Israel, Jordan, and Lebanon, all demonstrated material Canaanite culture. They span a geographical area often called the Southern Levant, which has similar boundaries as the historical region of Canaan. By combining the results of the DNA analyses from these individuals, the scholars assembled a dataset of the genome-wide DNA of 93 ancient Canaanites who lived between 2500 and about 1000 BCE. The researchers found that these Canaanites were descended from 2 major groups. First, as you'd expect, local populations from the Canaan region who had lived in the area for thousands of years. Second, migrant populations from the Zagros Mountains in present-day Iran and the broader Caucasus region between the Black and Caspian Seas. Using archaeological evidence, they reasoned that peoples who lived in the Zagros Mountains during the Chalcolithic age of the 5th and 4th millennia BCE migrated north to the Caucasus region, where they may have reproduced and mixed genes with the locals. These genetic lines then made their way down to the southern Levant, or the region of Canaan, between 2500 and 1000 BCE. This is where it gets really interesting. The author's quote show that the genomes of present-day groups geographically and historically linked to the Bronze Age Levant, including the great majority of present-day Jewish groups and Levantine Arabic-speaking groups, are consistent with having 50% or more of their ancestry from people related to groups who lived in the Bronze Age Levant and the Chalcolithic Zagros. Yes, you heard that right. The great majority of both present-day Jewish groups and Levantine Arabic-speaking groups appear to take a majority of their ancestry from people related to the inhabitants of ancient Canaan. Let's look at this graph from the study. Using these 2 computer models that test how well a mixture of ancient populations explains the genetics of a modern population, the academics compared the genetics of the 93 Canaanites to that of 17 present-day populations. The dark blue color represents the ancestry from the local populations who had been living in the Canaan region for millennia. The light blue is the Zagros and Caucasus genetics from populations who arrived in the southern Levant between 2500 and 1000 BCE. Both models produced extremely similar results. 3 out of the 4 modern Jewish populations inherited a majority of their DNA from populations related to these Canaanite groups. And it's here where our 2 strands converge. Another group with a majority of their ancestry coming from Canaanite-related populations, present-day Palestinians. Both modern Jews and Palestinian Arabs have significant ancestry from people related to these ancient populations that inhabited the area even before early biblical times. In fact, many studies show that most Jewish populations are genetically close cousins with Palestinians. Much has been made about the inherited right to this land of Canaan, the southern Levant, the Palestine region, the land of Israel, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, the land of milk and honey. But Ben's assertion that the history of this sacred, bloody land is Jewish and not Muslim is just wrong. In the end, neither Palestinian Arabs nor Israeli Jews can make a much better claim to ancient history or distant lineage here than the other. Both groups share not only a strong emotional connection to this land, but an ancestral one too. So if you're using that argument as a justification for why either group has a more legitimate right to this land today, it might be time to rethink it. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you so much for watching. I hope that I've been able to help you learn at least a little something about the history of the region, and maybe to see a new perspective on the claims to this incredibly controversial area. So I was originally going to tackle all 4 myths Ben talks about in the span of just this video, but as I kept researching and writing, I started to realize how big of a rabbit hole this was if I actually wanted to do the subject justice. I'm pretty deep into writing part 2 already, which would examine Ben's second quote-unquote myth, and we'll look more at the modern history from the birth of the Zionist movement in the late 1800s through to the 21st century. So if you enjoyed this and would like to see that, consider liking and subscribing and letting me know. Alright, thank you, and hope to see you next time.
You're the most misinformed person that I've ever met. You don't even know what's going on in Israel.
Okay, that's right. You don't know what's going on in Israel. Maybe you shouldn't be speaking on
Are
the
you
subject.
guys serious?
Yes, maybe you should leave it to me.
I'm sorry. Do you know what's happening in Israel?
Of course, bro. I read the newspaper.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? Why don't you crack an egg analogy all over me?
Okay.
Buddy? Can I start? Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, okay. There's a war on terror, Charlie. Have you ever seen CNN? Okay. George Bush right now.
Yeah, well, start from the beginning. Saddam Hussein has the oil.
Yeah.
Okay?
Oh. Charlie,
We
it is
have
a
decided
war on
to
terror.
help the people of Israel
to give our oil back to us.
by defeating Saddam Hussein.
My head is like swelling.
It's
with knowledge,
freedom, Charlie.
Like wonderful knowledge.
Well, you're being
sarcastic
Yeah.
when we're talking about our.
You can't hide from it forever.
You're an idiot.
You're an idiot.